Hi, everyone. This is John Stein, and this is the Future of Voice podcast, a production of the Open Voice Network. I'm John Stein, Executive Director of the Open Voice Network, and we are delighted today to have as our guest Ken Sutton, President and CEO, co-founder of Yobe out of Boston. Ken, serial entrepreneur, 20 years of strategy and product development, business management. Um, He's been in finance and marketing. He was a member of the U.S. Armed Forces in the Army. A guy who's done all kinds of things. Ken, welcome and thanks for taking your time.
John, thank you for inviting me. So it's a pleasure.
Let's start with the origin story. How did Ken Sutton end up in voice? How did Ken Sutton end up at Yobe? Take us from step
Yeah,
zero, although perhaps not all the way back, but how did you end up in this place?
yeah. We don't have enough time for all of that, but I think at the end of the day, my journey from a tech entrepreneurial standpoint is not conventional by any means. Any means whatsoever. It doesn't have the same roadmap. As you mentioned, I was fortunate enough to serve in the armed forces. That's how I got my ticket to pay for college. Then went to university after I served. After I graduated, ended up stumbling into a job in marketing, and built a relationship with the gentleman that owned that firm. Ended up buying him out of his interest for that company. Took that company from a one office that we had in Bloomfield, Connecticut. Scaled it, um, you know, 11 offices in 6 states. Sold it in 2005. Literally sat on the beach for a while. At the time I was in Florida, and kind of regrouped. And my goal was to go into finance out of college. I kind of stumbled into marketing, and always kept my eye on capital markets, and that's where I had an interest. Did some consulting work in that space just to figure out what was going on, and then that transitioned into deals and doing transactions, and rode that wave into 2009 when the market crashed. So I took my pennies and took my bruised ego. Did a lot of consulting work. I knew all the dead bodies were buried. I did a lot of commercial mortgage-backed securities, and I had relationships with sovereign funds, and companies were divesting from their real estate holdings at that time. Just went out and built a consulting business that was robust and kept me busy for a while people were doing workouts and dealing with the crash. Um, Started doing a lot of financing and project financing around renewable energies, and found that I had an interesting way of presenting technology type of projects to money, because there was a gap between the entrepreneur's passion about his project and the economics of it, right? And just serendipitous, stumbled across some IP. A buddy and I were screwing around in the studio. I spent some time in the music space. I DJ way through college. My father's been in the music business for 30 plus years. And so my buddy James and I, James at the time was the head audio engineer for a very large 3-letter media company, um, and came up with something when we were working on a project for his autistic son, which was really around his son's ability
Wow.
to listen to music inside of a car. The way that Collins reacted to the reflections of the frequencies inside of a cabin of a car, it was unpleasurable to him. And so James started working on, this is some type of frequency perceptual thing. So let me just play around in the studio, see if I can produce the discomfort out of the frequency. And what we found was that James stumbled across a way to actually do that, where Collins could actually sit down and listen to music inside the car. But when we listened to it, we heard perceptually something different than we've heard before. It was spatial audio. It was what HDTV had done for SDTV. It was salient, a different way of feeling and hearing the music. So I'm the business friend in the circle, and so I get the task of, hey, is this a business? Can you do something with this? And at the time, I wasn't that excited. We were working in very large data sets of WAV files, and I said, well, James, let's compress this and see what happens. And this is the genesis of Yobi. When we compress that audio from a WAV file to an MP3, so we're talking about huge reduction in data, we had higher fidelity, which is counterintuitive. And so what we stumbled across was a way to manipulate frequencies that stacked better through compression algorithms. So it retained a high level of fidelity, but you can reduce it to 1/8 the size of an MP3 player. And so that was the genesis of Yobi. was the ability to say, okay, we can hopefully create some software around this, go out to all of the streaming media platforms, the Titles, the Spotifys, the Pandoras of the world, cut their data cost in half, give them high level fidelity, and create interesting new watermarks because we were doing something interesting with the frequencies, right? Um, so set out to write some software and found that we had a huge barrier of entry. Like 95% of what we were doing outside of the 5% that was IP was us, meaning myself and James, intelligently understanding, hey, this is Steely Dan. I know what year Steely Dan was produced. I know it's going to be heavy in this area, light in this area, and we're manipulating the frequencies based on that information. So we needed artificial intelligence with some wrapper of signal processing, which was way out of my core competency. Um, and so I started doing some research, and I found 3 people on the planet that had both skill sets, meaning continuous math, discrete math, the difference between artificial intelligence and signal processing. One happened to be in Boston. I happened to be in Boston. My buddy happens to be a professor at BU. This person happened to be a senior professor at BU, and the stars were aligning. And so I went to Hamid and pitched him my thesis. I said, listen, I want to automate this. And he listened to what we had. There's some special sauce here. And after a few months of working on it, he came up with software. Great. Um, at that point, there was no universe where I wasn't going to make him a co-founder in my venture. It just was we just clicked as people, and we were trying to solve an interesting problem. But what we found was no one really cared about the music application. The music space was more interested in dealing with licensing fees than they were fidelity at the time. And so, I've kind of tracked different companies over the years from a finance standpoint. I was tracking Alexa. I was tracking how many devices were being sold. And I had a thesis that, hey, this voice thing is going to be a thing. I think the genie's out the bottle. So we took a lot of our science and say, okay, let's see if we can actually do this with voice. Can we enhance voice? And we could. And then we also said, can we enhance voice in real world environments? And we couldn't. We could not deal with enhancing the voice when there was noise. And so we started thinking about, well, what's the problem here? And this is the genesis of our current view of our technology. Traditional noise cancellation solutions are not always effective. And more importantly, we weren't using machine learning and calling it AI. We were using traditional AI. This is inferential AI that is unsupervised. So we started looking at, well, what are we trying to deal with from a signal standpoint? And what we're looking for are actually biomarkers. And so we started focusing on, okay, can we extract versus suppress? And what we found that methodology served us well, specifically when you need to have voice solutions work in what we call the real world. We as humans don't have a noise suppression methodology. We don't suppress noise. We pay attention using intelligence, and we extract the data from the noisy environment that we want to pay attention to. We use our brand of artificial intelligence to do exactly the same thing. Extract the biological, linguistic, and acoustic markers from voice from those noisy environments.
Just a tremendous story, and just to reduce the discomfort of an autistic child from that moment through your journey, and then now to extract, not suppress. I mean, Ken, your company now has the conversational audio front end cafe, CAFE. And in a sense, what I've come to realize and come to really appreciate is your enabling voice in the noisy, busy, messy real world with the ability to extract signal from all the noise. Do I get it? Is that correct? And talk to us about where that makes sense, why that's so important, and where.
Well, yeah, I think, John, our kind of thesis has been that until voice technologies operate the way humans do, meaning the tolerance for noise and the tolerance for environmental issues, it's always going to be clunky. And that's the unfortunate part about having a human standard. We know how this is supposed to work. We talk to people every day, right? So our goal has been to extract as much useful data from voice as possible and pass it on to our partners. So yeah, it could be the voice stream because you might be, I don't know, one of our 3-letter agency clients that want to listen because you're doing surveillance. So that's one application, is the "Can you hear me now" application,
Yeah.
right? The other is, hey, we want you to know who the person is. So we have our own, kind of biometric methodology. We are biometrically focused, and so, what can you do when you know who's speaking and you can hear who's speaking in noisy environments? That means you can go into public settings. So why is it important? Why is it salient now? I think we've seen the arc of the in-home consumer-facing voice applications, right? It's always been our thesis that this modality should be a little more focused towards, adding to the bottom line. Where could it be useful? Whether it be in industrial settings, commercial settings, or public settings, right? But all those areas tend to be in environments that are not sterile, right? So kiosk in a restaurant, I want to order using voice. Well, that's not a clean environment. That's a very difficult environment for voice technologies to work because there's noise and there's other people talking. So how do I use my conversational AI platform to discern, well, Ken's making an order, but not pay attention to the person at the next kiosk ordering the same thing, right? And there's enough TikTok videos going around about drive-throughs who are having this issue, right? So it's been our
Right.
thesis to empower our partners to basically plan their roadmap, their voice roadmap, their innovation roadmap around voice, and take the environmental hurdle out the equation. So what can you do if you remove the issue of on the barrier of entry of the acoustic environment, and you add in the fact of, yes, software type of component, we're software based, doesn't use the internet, so we're all on the edge. We know who's talking because we're automatically biometrically marking who's speaking. When you have those tools, what kind of opportunities and what kind of functionality can you build in those environments that are traditionally not quiet? And we're finding that we have a very large swatch of partners who are exploring those roadmaps very aggressively, because we are helping them penetrate those areas that traditionally you didn't see as applicable to voice technologies.
I mean, I could just think of from restaurant to, city transit, ticket to any number of environments, extremely noisy, extremely busy, very messy, and yet you're able to extract and pull that out. Outside, Ken, tell us more about just some of the use cases where your clients are finding your technology to be so valuable. We've mentioned a few, but you know, give us some other ideas.
Yeah, I think that there's some very clear buckets, right? There's some situations where you shouldn't be using your hands for anything else. So let's be clear. In cabin type environment is exactly that. Whether you're in a car, which is something that we're all familiar with that use case, but think about fleet management. If I'm a UPS driver or any type of large company that has a fleet and I want to do some fleet management, I want to talk to my drivers, I want to update routes, and I need to do that in a way where my driver doesn't have to touch any type of console to have that interaction. But it's noisy and it's a cabin of a car, right? So that's just one example. Of course, we talked about restaurants, and I like to use kiosk or anything that you're going to have to get information from or interact with. That's in a public environment. So it could be a restaurant, it could be a hotel, it could be, the middle of
Yeah.
Disney, and I'm trying to get directions to Magic Kingdom and understand how long the wait is, but I don't want to touch through a screen. Airport, we're talking to a few major airlines around adding voice and using the biometrics as identifiers for check-in at airports. So there's a huge swatch of the universe, I think, that when you start adding the fact that if we can work in this environment, does it add any value to our customers? Does it add any value to our enterprise platform to have voice as the interface? And it's always been my thesis, John. I think when you and I first talked, we came to an interesting realization that the only reason why we have keyboards on our computer, the only reason why we have them, is because we can't talk to them yet, right?
Hmm.
And so,
Yeah. Yeah.
can we enable some of that adoption? Yeah, I don't think the keyboard is going to be erased. It's not going to disappear because there's certain situations where you have to actually, put, text in. But there's a lot of opportunities for voice to basically be the interface in situations where it just makes sense not to use your hands.
I'm just thinking, any number of situations. I mean, airports, arenas, stadiums, restaurants, hotels. How do we make it easy? How do we make it natural? And certainly, voice um, as the present. It's the future, but it's also the present,
Mm.
and it's the opportunity in front of us. Again, with your technology, to enable to do that. Let's go to the final question here. And Ken, thanks again for your time. But here we are. The arc of the home assistant isn't going downhill, but it's kind of plateaued. And now we have, over the past 2 to 3 months, we've got the big sonic boom generative AI, large language models, ChatGPT. It's everyone's talking about it. When we talk to Ken Sutton about it, what does he say?
Well, I don't know if Ken Sutton matters in the conversation much, but um, not really. But it's always been my view that there was going to be something that was going to happen in the voice space that was going to be a convergence of technologies that was going to enable something that we didn't have before. And if you go back to, I think, my first pitch deck to our first seed investor, he will tell you that's exactly the way I positioned it, was that we want to be in a position that wherever that convergence is in voice, that we needed to basically be the front end for that to be accomplished. I think one of the shoes to drop is generative AI. The thing that I see about with that is voice is the natural interface for that type of back end, right? And where could it be useful? And I saw the seedlings of Jarvis, right? You say that the consumer
Mhm, mhm.
application for voice has come to a plateau, and that's a lot of it is just because of technology. It's not because of the back end partners. I think those solutions are fantastic. They work extremely well in certain environments. But now that you have this extra intelligence component, what can you do with it if you had the ability to actually have, let's say, distributed mics in a home where every microphone in the home was now turned on, and you're talking to your home in a more of an ambient type of way, right? I think the opportunities for voice and generative AI as a back end in public settings creates a very interesting kind of interface and knowledge share, and doing it in a natural type of foundation and format, right?
In a natural way.
That I think we are just kind of just playing around and spitballing the ideas now, but I think there's going to be some good ideas that come out of that.
Ken Sutton, thank you so much for your time. We've been talking with Ken Sutton, co founder, CEO, president of Yobe. Ken, thanks so much.
Thank you,
Best
John.
wishes, everyone. Thanks for listening.
Thanks, John.